So, I don't know, Donald said it was all right. we came together and what was reasonable, what made sense, what can we defend in terms of what is available. And that's how we came up with the 45% figure. We did get pushback on the mandatory language. But I have to tell you, well, just briefly, because I know there's folks here working hard as part of these systems. Our Department of Youth Services is not pushing this in any way, but we certainly work with them closely behind the scenes. We let them know what we were doing. We were asking, does this make sense as a policy measure, so that there wasn't any kind of surprise there. And I'm really hopeful that that will lead to it actually being meaningful policy measures. We'll see.
I do think it's important to point out that having
anything that they look at, that we thought was an extremely important piece that they get out there, that they look at, that they talk with the youth and the families and also the various groups that were interested. But we have that basically that independent source of dealing with information, so that we had not just the regular sources. We improved the Inspector General's the division within the Youth Commission substantially with the legislation we did. We also put in additional reporting things within the organization. But we thought it was a good fallback, a good final piece that we have out there, that we had this totally independent voice. And we've retained that as part of the legislation.
And not only retained it, but actually added some oversight from the independent ombudsman for county functions. The ombudsman's office will not have a presence in the county facilities, but they will receive data from counties that will allow them to determine whether or not there may be some systemic problems that they need to let the agency know about, so that the agency can do some monitoring and visits to the county facilities as well. So
it's an absolutely independent source for us, fortunately, and the things that we're doing to get information from. And we had some problems with independent ombudsmen for 2 or 3 of them, and we finally have come down to a lady who's doing a really exceptional job.
We have a question right here. Here comes Carl.
This is for Ohio. What kind of pushback did you get to imposing a requirement that 45% of the funds that were saved from closing juvenile facilities would be put into this usage?
well, first of all, there's always, especially in today's world, nobody knows what the next budget is going to be. And I think, unlike previous years where there was a tendency to promise money that may or may not exist in the future, I think this was one of the first times where there was a much more of a reluctance to do that. And so there was the pushback that said, well, how do we know, can we afford this? Obviously, you point out to it, well, it's only if there's a savings. You've already appropriated the money. So it's only to the extent you're underspending the appropriation. It ran into some bureaucratic difficulty. Once we overcame the policy obstacle, we ran into some bureaucracy problems among the budget staff. They didn't want to have to figure out what this meant, and try and figure out what the savings were. So it's clearly a work in progress, but as a policy tool, it's a pretty important statement of where we are and why we're about this. And, clearly the goal is not just to say, let's stop spending money and whatever happens, happens. The goal is to say there are better ways to do this, and that if we save money, that accelerates our ability to implement better ways to do this. And so, one of the things that I think is important about this, the advocates sold this. I mean, I may have made it sound like it was us. We didn't sell it, the advocates sold it. And in part it was because it was so consistent. They didn't say, let's just get rid of what doesn't work. It was, here are things that do work and how can we make them better? And things were built along those lines. And I think that was the best thing we had going for us, was that they had really thought through what the world would look like to the extent to which they could be successful in making change.
We have one final question, or two final questions.
Following up on that, the 45% reallocation Is that within the current budget year or the next year?
It's the budget we just passed, which is the next July to June, year. So it's 2013, 2014, 2012, 2013, now.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting, it's gotten a lot, it gets a lot of attention because it wasn't unprecedented, and I think we're really excited to learn from this. So I think it's been a really important way to push the envelope a little bit. And create incentives, frankly, for you all who what's the incentive to close an institution? Perhaps if those dollars just go back to the GRF. And if they aren't going to programs that demonstrate success. So part of this was to also give our systems that are making this change possible some incentive to continue to build the capacity at the local level to actually serve kids. I mean, Rory's got a question as well.
May I add just a little bit on that too, because Texas did obviously some very similar things about sending things on back to our juvenile probation departments and others. I'm part of a lot of national organizations. One of the ladies is here, Sarah Hammonds is here from the National Conference of State Legislatures. They do some wonderful work at NPSL. I'm also I'm also chairman of the Corrections Committee that deals with things with the American Legislative Committee Congress, which just passed a resolution this last week that basically recommends policy of sending additional juvenile money back to the local agency if there's savings to be made from cutting down and reducing population.
And by the way, that's the conservative legislature that passed that.
We're talking about
So we've got, I don't differentiate them that way as much. I suppose many of my friends do exactly that, but I'm also on the board of the Justice Center and Council of State Governments, which is the third large of the legislative group, and working with all of them. And I will tell you, the policies they have are very consistent, very close to each other, and one of the things that came out of the stuff that we did in Texas is a program called Right on Crime, and many of you have probably started to hear a lot about it. On the conservative side, that it basically takes positions and policies that are very positive in many of the kinds of things that you and others have talked about. Not everything your legislative students would certainly be on their list, but many of the things that are types of things that says these are the types of stuff that make smart policy are also in the work that they're doing. Watch all of them, and don't ever hesitate to look at all of those national organizations, every one of them, to see if there's some ties that you can't get that would be very helpful for you in doing things that you may want to do within your state or within your community.
And maybe not think of them as unlikely allies.
Yeah,
They can be likely allies.
They are most likely to be positive allies. They won't agree with you on everything. None of them will. Okay. It's like any other legislative group, and dealing with Ohio legislators, I'm sure that there were some that they thought were going to support everything along the line that did. In Texas, we had some that I thought were going to oppose everything that they did. So it's a matter of you can work with those groups.
We have a question.
Thank you to the panel. I appreciate your work that you've done. I applaud your efforts and congratulate you on your victories. I think you're outstanding examples, your two states of what can be accomplished with very strategic legislative and political strategy. So my questions are both for Gabriella and Abby with respect to the work that was accomplished and what you thought the campaign's value added was to your efforts. You've been toiling to move this ahead for quite some time. And I want to be quite explicit about what the campaign's added value is. And even as a foundation, we partnered on a PIP with the idea that it would give some flexibility in terms of what resources could be given to states to advance the legislative reforms. And I just call it out, frankly. The IRS isn't here in a second time. But I know that we state in the tax laws. But if you just, what do you get?